everyone, welcome back to Sharon Cullen Art. Today I'm going to be doing another gouache painting. This time I'll be doing a landscape, and I will do this in time lapse, but I want to remind you that up in the upper right hand corner of your screen where your settings are, when you're watching a video, you can change your playback speed. So I just wanted you to be aware of that. Now, I had forgotten to change my SD card before starting the video, so I already have my sketch down. But I just wanted to let you know that you can do a nice, quick, easy sketch when you're coming up with your plans for your painting, whatever it may be. Just go ahead and put a pencil sketch in, something simple. Doesn't have to be elaborate, just to get an idea of what you want on your paper. And then you can go ahead and paint over it. Now I'm doing this nice and dark so that you can see my lines and see what my plans are. This will be a landscape. What I did was I just punched in, I was in the mood to do a stream or waterfall or something with some light and maybe a mossy forest. So I just Googled all of those things and put that in my search bar, and I found this photo, which doesn't have everything I want, but I'm going to make it my own. So I used this as my basis. I like the tree going across this little stream and the mossy areas and all of that, which I'm not even sure I'm going to use, but I'm going to go ahead and do this. I'll make it my own. I might change it up a bit, but I'm going to go ahead and get started doing this in time lapse, and I will voice over and talk to you along the way and explain everything that I'm doing. Again, I'm going to try to make sure I can fit everything in the video so that I'm not hanging off the edge of the page here. And I'm going to have to back it up though, so it'll be a little bit more distant than what you might want to see. I got to get it on an angle so that I can fit the paints in. But let's go ahead and get started. I think most of you know by now how I do my gouache painting. And normally my gouache isn't as dirty as you see it above. There was a lot of spilling going on. So what I'm doing today is taking a lot of that gouache and using it to mix my colors, because there's blue in just about everything. But I'll eventually get it cleaned out okay. So as I start, I always start with a thinner amount of gouache on my brush. And I see a bloom forming there on my paper that I'll be fixing up in the sky in just a few minutes, which really isn't necessary because it's going to be covered with trees later anyway. Now, I usually don't go in this thick on an underpainting right off the bat, but for the ground, I wanted to go ahead and do that. And that's just going to be sitting underneath as I move along. Now in the beginning, it will be pretty ugly, so just bear with me. You know that when I paint with gouache, I go through a serious ugly stage before I get to the final product, so just bear with me. There were a couple things that I wanted to discuss today while I am painting, and they had to do with a few questions that I received on some recent videos that I did. One person had asked me about gouache, that she didn't want to invest a lot of money in gouache because she wasn't sure if she would like it or not. And she wondered if she could just buy white gouache and mix it in with her watercolor. And my response to that was no, don't do it, because you're not going to get the richness of color. Everything is going to be muted by white. It's like putting white in red is going to give you pink. So you're never going to get the colors you want, and you're going to get frustrated with it, and you probably will never use it. So my suggestion was to get a small set, and I always recommend the M-gram gouache because it is artist quality. It's the only one on the market that markets itself as artist quality, and that's because of its light fastness and pureness of pigment, where other gouaches were really created many, many years ago for illustration purposes, which is no longer necessary because people are using computers and those Wacom things and all sorts of stuff. So they don't need to use paint anymore for illustration. So my point is that those gouaches were not created to be light fast or to be used to hang paintings on the wall, whereas M-grams are. And I'm hoping that Winsor & Newton will join the bandwagon and eventually change that. But until gouache really begins to take off, and I see the early stages of it coming, so a lot more people are using it than there were even just 3 years ago. So I'm hopeful it'll change. But the reason I said to pick the M-gram, the other reason, was because you can get a set of 5 for under $25. They're 15 ml tubes, which are pretty good size, and they are the primary colors. You'll get cobalt blue, azo yellow, and naphthol red, as well as a black and a white. And that's really all you need. You can mix every color under the rainbow with those. And then if you decide you like gouache, then start to add more colors to it. Now, I don't need to have all the colors I have. I get them because I can get them. So that's why I do it. But it's not necessary, and I could mix my colors. Next, another reason for using gouache over mixing it with watercolor is that your gouache is so much more concentrated than watercolor is, and the pigments are larger, which gives it its opacity and sitting on top of the paper. So there are those reasons as well. Now I refer you back to my Everything I Know About Gouache video, which I will link at the end. If you have not seen it, I recommend you go see it because I cover so much information about gouache, and I've been going over it and over it again, and it's easier to just refer you back to that video, which is very long and you may want to watch it in parts. The next thing I wanted to go over was a somewhat kind of rudely put comment that I received, and it was regarding composition, that I had no composition on the previous video that I posted, that the river was down the center and all sorts of stuff. Well, first of all, there was no river in that painting, and I'm sorry that she couldn't recognize that. It was 2 cliffs with a log going across, and the log in the center was the composition. Now, one thing I'm going to tell you is that when you're first starting out in art, especially if you are in school or you're taking private instruction from someone, you're going to hear about the rule of thirds for composition in art. The rule of thirds is probably one of the most basic rules that has been used in painting in ages. It's used in photography as well, and it's a compositional rule of thumb that's commonly used in setting up your composition so that you have your focal point in one of the 4 corners of your painting toward the center, but in that third, and that you should never put your focal point in the center of a painting. But that's a very basic rule and it's often overlooked by amateur artists or people just starting out, and forgotten by many teachers. But it's one of the most important rules that a novice learns when they're in class. So using it will help improve the design of your paintings. But in art, rules are made to be broken. So an artist should be able to freely stretch and push the boundaries. But you really need to know the rules first. So when she said that to me about the rule of thirds and that I had no composition, but my painting, my colors looked nice, was how she put it. So be it. If that's the way you want to be, that's fine. But I talked to other artists about this, and they all feel the same, that in general, yeah, you stick with the rule of thirds, but you don't have to, and you can push that boundary and you can put it in the center of your painting, but you have to balance your painting, which is why you'll see a tree on either side. You'll see cliffs jutting out on either side, clouds periodically placed in the thirds areas. There's all sorts of things that I did in that painting to bring it into a usable composition. It was also a fantasy landscape, but you will see many painters that will take a photograph or a scene that they're painting en plein air, and they'll have a river coming straight at them down the center. It may loop in off of an edge, but it comes toward the center. Biggest thing that you want to make sure of in a composition is that you're not allowing the eye of the viewer to run off your page. So you don't want all of your trees pointing outward off of your canvas or off of your paper. And you don't want your river running off to one side without having something above it or below it to tie the eye back in and pull it back into the painting. And I may have to show you that in photos, and I can do that in another video, but I just wanted to tell you guys that because, this person went off on me about having poor composition. And like I said, rules are made to be broken. They're not necessarily supposed to always be absolute. So anyway, I did refer this person to a link. And right off the bat, it says, the rule of thirds is actually a guideline more than a rule. It's intended to help the artist with placement of elements and focal point within the composition. But if you want your viewer to ignore the other parts of your painting, then go ahead and break the rule and center your subject like a big bullseye. You can do that, which is what I did in that fantasy landscape. I wanted people to see the atmosphere and that it was a huge drop-off down below. So I wanted that to be the center. And heck with the cliffs on either side. It was just to draw the eye into the center, which is why I used that as a composition. So that's all I have to say about that. Now today's painting, you see, is done more by the rule of thirds. I have my river coming in on the left upper corner of the rule of thirds and then exiting on the lower right corner. But I have that tree there that goes across the river that draws the eye back in on the left lower side, pulls the eye up across the tree and then back toward the rocks, and then up toward the yellow grass and the light in the painting, and then back up and around again. So you're not drawing that viewer right off that river, right off the bottom of the page, and the eye never comes back again. So that's it. That's all I wanted to say about composition. I do hope the person who made the comment yesterday is watching so that she can understand what I'm saying about this compositional fact and that the rule of thirds can be broken, but not by a novice or a beginner. Really, you need to get used to that because for the majority of your painting, that is what you're going to be doing. In still lifes, though, quite often you'll see a still life centered. You'll have an object off into one of the thirds, but you may have your overall composition centered in the canvas or paper. The other reason that I placed my composition the way I did, putting those cliffs on either side with the long drop off in the middle, is because that's where I wanted this focus to be. And had I put it over one of the thirds on either side of the painting in the upper or lower corner, then there would be a mound of earth, cliff, mountain, whatever, consuming 2/3 of that painting so that I could get that drop off there. And then what becomes the focal point? You're not sure. Is it the big mound of area with the trees on it, or is it the big drop off that I was trying to allude to with that log going across the top. Now, she thought it was a river, but even if she thought it was just atmosphere, I believe she would have felt the same way, because she was taught or read in a book or learned somewhere that the rule of thirds has to be exactly that way, and there is no other way to do it. Think about it for a second, though, because if we all used one of those four corners every single time and placed our focal point in one of those four corners every single time, our artwork would get pretty redundant. So like I said, it's a general rule of thumb, but it is not an absolute. So I do think if I had put that cliff over to one side, to 1/3, and then had the other 2/3 being consumed by cliffs and rocks and trees and stuff like that, that you might lose that. Now, I could do it again and do it a little bit differently, but I would probably add something more to that. And there might be more than one focal point. And you can do that in a painting as well, in a composition. You can have more than one focal point. You don't want a lot of focal points, though, because then the eye doesn't know where to go on the canvas or paper. It gets lost. It gets overconsumed by stuff, and you don't know where to look. And then it becomes a stressful painting rather than something that is calming to the eye. So hopefully that was understood. Maybe I made no sense at all. I don't know. In this painting, you can see that the focal point would be down by the tree, where that tree curves over the river or stream or whatever, and the blue sky is shining in that one single spot on the water. That is where the focal point is. And if you see, it's in the bottom right third of the painting. And that's what the commenter was referring to about composition. So normally, if you look at my paintings, you can usually tell it's it's following the rule of thirds, is what I'm trying to say. But you also might find a photograph and you want to copy that photograph because you like the way the photographer took a photo, or that you took a photo and you liked what you saw. And so you keep it that way. And yeah, you could do that. That's what the eye sees when you're looking out over the horizon, and that's fine. But it's not something you want to always do. You do want to make sure that you do have a composition set up. And the nice thing about a photo or working out in plein air, you can, oh, my dog's gonna bark because Pat's home. You can easily take what you see and narrow your focus down so that you can place that focal point exactly where you want it. And then there are portraits as well. Portraits are centered. Your composition is always centered in the painting. That's where you break the rule of thirds. Or are we focusing on one hair, or on one freckle on a cheek, or one eyeball that might be placed over to one of the thirds? I mean, it's getting a little bit ridiculous. We're splitting hairs here literally, but that's an example where composition is centered and is acceptable. Okay, here I'm just taking my number 2 silver black velvet brush, and I am just cleaning up the edges on the tree and adding a little more highlight in certain places, not all over. As I add to the trees and it dries, it darkens, the white darkens. So I don't always know exactly how much highlight I'm going to be having. So that's why I keep going over it like this. But I'm just about done here. I'm cleaning everything up, and I will take the tape off, and that will be it. I also date my paintings, so that's what I'm doing here, is just taking my date stamp and just stamping it on the edge. And that way I know what year, what time I painted it, so that I can watch my progress through my sketchbooks. So my next video will most likely be a building vlog video. Hopefully there's been some progress. We've had a couple issues with a guy showing up on time to get his work done, and it's been a little bit frustrating. But in the meantime, everybody remember, be courageous, paint with wild abandon, and most of all, be kind to each other. Take care.